Welcome back to the Geary Theory. I'm your host, Lauren Geary, and today I'm talking to one of my childhood heroes. We're talking to Korey Rowe. Now, Korey was a producer for Loose Change. He worked with Dylan Avery, who was the director of Loose Change. And for those of you that are new to conspiracies, let me tell you how legendary, when I say legendary, I mean legendary Loose Change is. It was the best documentary to put together all the evidence that 9/11 was an inside job. That the official narrative we were being told that terrorists essentially hijacked planes, flew them into the building just collapsed in and on himself, that story is not true. They put it together and they spearheaded and gave a voice to all the people that questioned the official narrative. And I don't think that today's young conspiracy theorists honestly understand the power of what they did. They were talking conspiracy theories when it was an ugly word. When to say you believed things against the official narrative meant you were crazy. Now we're very blessed to have a generation of young people that are proud to say they're conspiracy theorists. I love that. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about my background. I grew up with a conspiracy theorist dad, was a conspiracy theorist way back in the day. And in high school, I think he kind of started our education on conspiracy theories, and he sat us down and he said, watch Loose Change. It was the beginning of my journey of questioning the narrative and to be a free thinker. They gave that to me with this documentary. There's two things we're going to talk about in this podcast that I want to give you guys some background on. We talk about one, we go over their evidence for what flew into the Pentagon. The Pentagon, we are being told, was hit by a plane that was hijacked. I would like to see video evidence of a plane hitting the Pentagon. You would think a government building with lots of security cameras would be able to pull that off. You would think that the convenience store across the street that had a camera pointing at the Pentagon would be able to say, here it is. Here's the plane hitting the Pentagon on camera. Why don't we have that? And I think that those of you that are new to this are like assuming there was video evidence, but there isn't. The government released about 5 frames of footage of a security camera that was apparently, this is the video of the Pentagon being hit by a plane. There is no plane. There's no plane in the footage. All you see is a big explosion coming out of the side of the building. I'm not saying a plane didn't hit it, but I think it's highly suspect that they haven't given us any footage on it actually happening. Very odd. The second thing we talk about is Building 7. So I honestly think, this is my perspective, is that nobody even knows about Building 7 that is not already into the conspiracy world. I don't think your average person walking around that believes the official narrative about 9/11 even knows about Building 7. Building 7 was a building, a part of the World Trade Center series. And it was a smaller building. I think my guess is about 25% of the height of the towers. And it was off to the side of the towers. Building 7, this is the official narrative, in the 9/11 report, had a couple floors that had caught fire because of the embers of the towers. And those couple floors being on fire caused the building to collapse in and of itself. Now, when I say a couple fires, I'm literally talking a couple fires. This building was not engulfed in flames. It was not like looking ragged about to fall. And yet these couple floors being on fire caused the building just to collapse in on itself at free fall speed. There was no plane that hit this building. Just a couple fires. That's odd. So a lot of things odd about 9/11 when you start digging into it. I could go on and on and on, but the one I think that's crazy, that somebody walking around New York City while they're cleaning up the debris picks up and finds a passport, and the passport belonged to one of the hijackers of the plane. Just sitting there on the ground. not burned, pretty good condition, just hanging out. So you got to be telling me that the hijacker who flew the plane into the building, his passport just flew, like it was completely fine. It just somehow landed on the ground of New York City untouched. Yet the black boxes in the plane are so destroyed we can't find them. But don't worry, his passport's on the ground. And that proves he was the one that flew the plane. I don't know. There's so many things I could go on and on. But I want you guys to listen to this interview. It was truly an honor to talk to him. I was in awe when I even got the email that he's happy to do this interview. And I am so grateful for his time. I'm going to link in the show notes the Loose Change documentary. And I'm going to also, he has a book coming out. So when that book is released, I'll update the show notes. You can go check out his book. Go watch Loose Change and watch this podcast. You don't want to miss it. Let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have Korey Rowe. So Korey Rowe is one of the producers for Loose Change. And Korey, I just want to say, so I want to tell you a little bit of background. So my dad is an old school conspiracy theorist. I think he started following conspiracies in the late 80s, early 90s. And then when I kind of was early high school, I think it was like 9th grade, he started to like really sit down and educate me on conspiracy theories. And for me, 101 Conspiracies was like Loose Change documentary. So it is truly a powerful movie in my family. And then when I met my husband, he didn't know anything about this. And the first thing I did was like, you have to watch Loose Change. And a lot of people are now talking about 9/11. And there's this whole generation of conspiracy theorists that weren't here before. And a lot of the younger people too, they weren't even, whether or not they were alive or they were so young, they didn't even remember 9/11, are now going back and looking at that. And a lot of people are turning to your film, which I think is really powerful. So that's kind of what I want to get into it today. Like, let's start with your origin story. How did you even get involved in the production of Loose Change?
Sure. So the story begins in a small town in upstate New York called Oneonta, New York, which is my hometown where I was born and raised, with my best friend Dylan Avery. We hung out in high school together, and I joined the military about 2 weeks before 9/11. My first day of basic training was actually 9/11, and then I went, to Afghanistan, and then to Iraq after that. But during my military career, Dylan and I were communicating, me from overseas, him from Oneonta, New York, and I was telling him a little bit about what was going on in Afghanistan and the invasion and things of that nature. And he's raised anti-war, anti-hate. His mom owned a natural food store years before it was trendy. And, he started to kind of get this idea that he wanted to do something. He didn't know what it was, but he was like, I want to do something that tells people that I don't agree with what's going on. And so he wrote a fictional script called Loose Change about 3 characters who go on an adventure, find out that 9/11 was an inside job and that it was their job to, educate the public about it. And so Dylan and I shot some scenes for this movie in between my tours, actually after Iraq. And so after Iraq came home, we shot some scenes for this fictional movie, and Dylan started cutting it together. And during the process, he kept cutting away from the scenes so he could explain the information a little bit more in depth of what we were talking about. And so he put together this whole film, and he showed it at 2 different film festivals. And at both film festivals, everybody was like, your acting is terrible. Like, the whole thing doesn't make any sense. Drop all of that and just make a documentary, because the stuff that's documentary style is amazing. And so Dylan's not one to listen, not listen to good advice. So we cut out all of our scenes of us acting. We still have them. I've got all the tapes. But it turned into a 50-minute documentary that he released in 2005. And so, I'm sorry, 2004, in the late spring. And so I was involved from the early start of it, both in the fictional side of it. And then after I was done with the military, after I completed my tour, I went to Dylan and I was like, hey man, don't have a lot going on. Let me help you produce this movie that we started making together. And he was like, absolutely, I'd love some help with it. And from there, it just really took off, because what we had this fresh piece of media that people were engaging with. And then we had myself, who was a 2-tour veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, who was against the wars in the Middle East. And I was willing to speak about that. And so, small media jumped onto us very quickly, most specifically the Pacifica Network out in California, which is a Pacifica Radio Network Corporation, which is KPFK in LA, and then all the way up to San Francisco and into NorCal. And so they flew us out to LA, and we did an 8-day, 7-city tour where we would show the movie. Every day we'd go on the radio station, we'd talk about the movie, talk about the screening, then we go to the screening and we talk, show the movie and then answer questions afterwards. And it was just gangbusters. Like, every screening was packed. And then after we got back from that, things just continuously took off, and the film went really supernova over the next couple of years. And as young gentlemen, we did our best to represent it and to do the best job we could with it.
Wow, that's awesome. So going into this, what did you think about 9/11? Did you feel like it was an inside job, or were you kind of learning that as you explored the topic?
So as a soldier in Afghanistan post 9/11, so my first day of basic training was 9/11, and then I was shipped immediately to Afghanistan. And so I had no exposure to mainstream media. I had no exposure to any media except for the Armed Forces Network. And so I believed the story hook, line, and sinker. I actually have an article right here on my wall that says terrorism must be dealt with, is the quote that I'm quoted saying in the article, because I fully believed that the attacks of 9/11 warranted the response that the United States government took by invading Afghanistan. And I was on the front lines of that. And I believed that 9/11 happened because of what they said. And it wasn't until I got into Iraq that things didn't start to add up to me. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. It was said that there was weapons of mass destruction and nerve gas. And I was one of the first people there. There was none of that stuff. It was mostly just people living on about $1 a day. And then we started, killing people who were innocent of any crimes that had anything to do with 9/11 or terrorism, or had nothing to do with it. We ended up taking people's lives who were trying to steal pipe out of Saddam's pipe yard because they needed piping for their village to get water, because the system was just deteriorating because there was no government. And then, of course, our unit engaged them for some reason, and people died on that field over pipe that we didn't have any use of it, and it wasn't our pipe, so I don't know why it happened. And so things started to not add up to me. So as Dylan and I continued to communicate while I was in Iraq, he actually sent me the first version of Loose Change that anybody had ever seen while I was stationed in the northwest corner near Syria, in a small town called Sinjar. And in a bombed out old abandoned building, me and a couple of my army buddies popped in this DVD and we watched it, and eruption. I mean, you're talking about guys who are in combat dealing with this stuff, and then to see this kind of counter information come up. Some of them didn't take it very well, and there was brawl and stuff like that, and tears, and people are fighting and yelling and stuff like that. But it immediately was very visible to me how powerful this message was, and how it resonated with literally everybody who was alive on that day. And at that moment is when I fully signed up, and I was like, whatever this is, I don't know what we're doing yet, but I see it. And for the first time, I can actually see what it is, and it is powerful, and it is reactionary. And this is something that the American public and the world need to see. And so that's why I went to join up with Dylan after I was done.
Yeah. So Dylan, was he a conspiracy theorist before this, or did he the same thing, kind of like learn? So when he saw the towers fall, he wasn't really questioning it, and then as time went on, he started to question it. Is that? Yeah.
Yes, okay. That's basically it. I mean, on the day there was definitely some people out there, saying, "Hey, this doesn't feel right. Something's going on here." But again, when it happened, we were both 18. We were very young. We just got out of high school. We had no worldly experience. We hadn't lived through any of these kind of events yet in our lives. And so for me and most of my peers, it was just kind of like, "Oh, wow, look at all this stuff that's going on. This is crazy." And it took for a significant amount of time for us to kind of go, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I was 10 years old and I was in grade school, and I just remember, I lived near an Air Force base, and I just remember like the world shifted overnight. especially being near an Air Force base. Like, it was hard for people to get in and out of the base. I mean, when you go to the airport, like, all of a sudden now you need so much security, and you just, at the time, you don't question the narrative. And then when you go back and you watch documentaries like Loose Change, I was even rewatching it multiple times for this interview. I was like, it's kind of crazy, especially when you watch the towers fall, that the whole country didn't really question this. It's just that's kind of what baffled me the most. So that being said, when you guys first put Loose Change out there, what was your expectation? I know you had a glimpse kind of when you're in the military. What was your expectation of the country's reaction? Did you think it was going to get as big as it did?
Absolutely not. I mean, and by no way did we ever imagine what was going to happen. You know, Dylan, back in those days, this was before YouTube. The only way that you could really share the video online was through torrent sites and DVDs. And so Dylan made 1,000 DVDs because that was the minimum order. And he never thought that he would go through 1,000 DVDs. He was like, I'll have these for the rest of my life. They were gone in 2 weeks. And then somebody uploaded the video to a new site called Google Video back in the day. And that started in early 2005. And that was really one of the major proponents that made it take off in the way that it did. But no, we definitely never planned for it to go where it did. We just thought, hey, we'll make this movie. We'll say, you know, what we think about these events, and we'll put it out there, and that'll be that. And, you know, it was an immediate reaction that we were not expecting.
What were you guys, I mean, going from kind of, you know, like, I'm just going to put this in your mind. It was like kind of go fly under the radar, and all of a sudden it's blown up. Did you have any fear of just government or, you know, the men in black suits, anything like that, of now you guys are kind of, you know, young kids made this documentary. It's gotten a lot more attention than you expected. Did you guys have any like fear with that, or no?
Yes, definitely. I mean, you know, it was a very interesting time in American history in the post 9/11 world, where you had these new government organizations, new methods of surveillance, new methods of security, you know, all these different agencies that were created. And so, you know, we always were concerned that, you know, bad things could happen, but at the same time, that didn't negate our responsibility to own the film that we created and put out there. And so we had to represent what we put out there and stay true to it through the entire process. And so it was challenging. But in the end, who ended up being our worst enemies were not people from the government. It was people from within the movement who diluted the message with nonsense, with you know, fanatical claims of different things that didn't make any sense and had nothing to do with what we were trying to do. And so that was our biggest challenge through the years, was kind of saying, hey, no, we're not part of that conversation. We're focused on 9/11. We're focused on this day, these evidence points, because this is what the families of the victims of 9/11 are asking for. And these are the people that we want to have answers for. And so it was always a challenge for us to try to be the most legitimate version that we could be. And I think that's why some people over the years were like, well, second edition is my favorite version. And it's like, yes, second edition is a great version of Loose Change because it had some really sensational claims in there. It was really entertaining and engaging. But as we continued to go through the process, we negated some of those things for what we felt was more concrete evidence that would have pushed us in the direction of getting a new 9/11 commission, because that was our main goal through the whole process, was to get a new investigation into 9/11, get a new 9/11 commission that wasn't a whitewash, and have family members of the victims present asking questions that the government needed to answer. And so, you know, the boogeyman was always there, but the boogeyman came in a lot of different forms. I mean, I had problems with the military at that time too. And so, you know, the military was after me and they wanted to shut us down, and the government put up, you know, .gov sites about us and debunking us. And then, you know, anything they could do to discredit us, to make us look like fanatical teenagers that didn't know what they were talking about. But in the end, that actually only added to the interest of who we were and what we were doing, because people are like, wait, kids made this, like college kids made this, and this is like taking the country. So it's crazy in all directions, lots of different boogeymen, lots of different things that we had to fight against, and a lot of human emotions throughout the whole process.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting is I went through and watched the different editions you had come out with. And it was really interesting because each one, I felt like you focused more on different pieces of evidence, which was really cool. I just was finishing the final cut. And that one was your longest one, I believe. I saw it was about 2 hours, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that and American Coup are the two longest versions for sure, because
Yeah.
we were trying to get everything in there. That was at a time, Loose Change Final Cut was supposed to include Charlie Sheen was going to be the narrator of it,
Mm.
and we went out to LA and worked with the studios to create a theatrical version of Loose Change that was going to be shown in theaters throughout the country with Charlie Sheen narrating it, who was the highest paid actor in Hollywood at the time,
Yeah.
and then we got railroaded by conservative media, who was Bill O'Reilly at that point, came out with a story. He found out what we were doing, and he did a total hit piece on us. And then the next morning, page 6 of the New York Post did another hit story, and then Bill O'Reilly did a follow-up where he got Mark Cuban, who was going to distribute the film, onto the thing and kind of just attacked him. So unfortunately, that deal ended up not going through, and we released Loose Change Final Cut about 8 months later. And again, we were trying to get everything in there because we wanted it to be the final cut, but Loose Change wasn't done with us yet. And so a couple years later, we ended up in 2009 making Loose Change American Coup, and then Loose Change American Coup HD. Because you got to remember also, this movie was made so long ago that the original versions were only made in standard definition, which is not even HD. And today in today's 4K world, it doesn't meet the requirement for a lot of people to watch it and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely Final Cut and American Coup are the longest versions. They have the most in there, but again, like I said, second edition is everybody's favorite.
Yeah, for sure. I love that one. When you were going through all the evidence, what to you was like the first piece of evidence that you was like, okay, there's something nefarious here? What was that evidence?
World Trade Center Building 7 is always the number one thing for us. Like it's the most irrefutable piece of evidence from that day. The fact that a third skyscraper fell at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which had no debris, no planes ran into it, and it completely collapsed into its own footprint. We know that there was explosions going off in that building because we interviewed Barry Jennings. Barry Jennings was worked in the Office of Emergency Management inside of Building 7, and he was called into Building 7, into the Office of Emergency Management, to respond to that and to help assist with the recovery efforts that were already underway. When he got to that office, he ended up getting stuck in the building because bombs were going off and things were like stairwells he couldn't get out of and things of that nature. And he thought he was going to die in that building. Everybody else who was in the Office of Emergency Management had evacuated the building, and there were still cups of coffee with, steam coming off them and things of that nature. So he knew they had just left. And so the building had been evacuated when there was absolutely no reason for it to be evacuated. And then furthermore, explosions going off all day. And then for the building to collapse into its own footprint at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, after they reported that it had already collapsed when it was literally in the background of the shot.
It's crazy.
How are we not talking about this more? Like, this deserves to have some, microscope on this and really get into it. And so that's why after Loose Change, Dylan made another film called Seven, which was focused just on Building 7, and really exploring the NIST report and the counter evidence from a doctor up in Alaska who did a lot of tests and proved that it had to be controlled demolition, because the entire NIST report relies on one steel column collapsing and claiming that was the reason for the entire building to collapse the way that it did, which is absolute nonsense. Not to mention the controlled demolition experts that have seen that video without the precursor of knowing what it was, and every one of them says that's controlled demolition. And then Larry Silverstein said he was going to pull it, and then what's his name there, the John, I can't remember, he's a presidential candidate. He also said that they were going to pull it. And they always sidestep these things. And then the other piece of evidence that really stood out to me was how much money was made by Larry Silverstein because of those attacks. And he was able to claim separate acts of terrorism on each building, making way more money than the building ever needed. And then once you get into what was wrong with the buildings, the amount of asbestos they had to clean out of it, all these things that they were being held accountable for that needed to be fixed. And all of a sudden this miraculous thing happened that he made all this money off of, and the buildings disappeared, and he had all this fresh real estate that he could build on with all this money he just made off of it. And so to me, it was just like check box, check box, check box. There's obviously another story here. And we're not being told what that is. And again, it's over all these years now, over all these years they're looking at it. That's the way I see it, is that there are consistent storylines going in different directions that don't align with the official version. And
Right.
those storylines by themselves are interesting and unique, but there's not enough there to claim the entire picture. It's when you start to put those different pieces together, you're like, there's enough here that we need to continue to have this conversation. We need a new investigation into this. And today we know that that's the fact. Like, just like we know that the lies that got us into Iraq were lies, we know that the
Yeah.
Saudi government was more involved with 9/11 than the American public or the American government ever told us. They knew about it back then. It's been released because the victims' family members are still pushing lawsuits through the courts to get the evidence released because they know that it's a whitewash. And again, that's
Yeah.
who we've been trying to back through this whole thing, is the victims' family members who are still alive, who are saying to the government, that's bullshit. You are lying to me. I want to know what happened to my family, and doing everything they can to get that information released.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think Building 7, when I talk to people who have never even heard that 9/11 was an inside job, they never even heard that presented to them. And then I mentioned Building 7, like I don't even go to anything else because it's just like, how can you argue that? There was a couple fires and the building just collapsed in and on itself within, like you talked about in the documentary, free fall speed. And it's like, people say, well, the Twin Towers, because of the jet fuel and it weakened the steel, it's like, you don't even have to, that's not even an argument when it comes to Building 7. And nobody even knows about that building. It's like, it's completely wiped from the official narrative. And then I wonder, and maybe you can give some insight to this, why would, and maybe, like, I don't know, maybe I missed it in my research, but why would they take the time to demolish Building 7?
Well, it was, at that point they're clearing real estate. The entire World Trade Center complex has been absolutely eviscerated, and in my opinion, that was the point: was to eliminate the World Trade Center complex. And the Building 7 was one of those, because Building 5 was collapsed because it was underneath the towers. I believe 2 World Trade Center was as well. So the entire complex was destroyed, and that was the intention. By whether, no matter how you look at it, whether you believe the terrorists were the ones that did it or the United States government did it, the goal was to destroy the World Trade Center complex.
Okay, that makes sense. And so you got to take out the separate building. Wow, that's crazy. There's so many conspiracy theories that are rising right now, and so I'm wondering if you also have any other opinions on this. It's very clear from the documentary that there was an inside job here. Now, a lot of people are kind of pointing to Israel today, and there's all this surface, this like new thing people are talking about this Israeli art students going in and have access to the building. I guess I'm wondering what your opinion is on, with having done so much research. Do you believe that the United States government was solely behind it, or do you think there was other government agencies or countries behind it?
It's a black op, no matter what. So it's not something that's going to be briefed with the president. This is something that was orchestrated by lower echelons of the government, headed by Dick Cheney, no question about it. And because of that, I'm sorry, go back, give me your question one more time.
Yeah, like a lot of people are pointing to maybe
Oh, right.
Israel was behind. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a really touchy subject. And that was something that we battled a lot through this whole process, because there is evidence to suggest that there's something going on there. But the minute you say anything about Israel, you're anti-Semitic. And that was one of the major things that we were trying to fight when we were going through this, because everybody was like, oh, you're claiming 9/11 was a side job, so you hate the Jews. And it's like, oh, whoa, hey, hold on a second. Yeah. We didn't say that. Please don't put that in our mouth. We just know that there is some things that you should be aware of. And that's what you just mentioned, completely legitimate. There was a group of art students, quote unquote art students, who had full access to the building for months and months and months leading up to 9/11, where they had access to maintenance shafts, maintenance elevators, maintenance areas. And nobody really knew what they were doing. And it seems really strange. And again, not much of it is mentioned. More investigation is necessary. What were they doing? Why were they given such, carte blanche access to such a, secure building in downtown Manhattan? So it's there's a lot there. But we've always tried to stay a little bit away from the Israel angle, just because of how quickly the mainstream media would jump on us and say, you're anti-Semitic, you don't deserve to talk, you're anti-American. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So it's there. There's definitely stuff to look into, but it's not something that we ever went into very deeply, because it was such a hot button issue.
Yeah, and especially back then. I mean, people need to remember that the Loose Change came out in 2005, then you had Final Cut in 2007, if I'm getting my dates right. And so this was a different time. And I think I'm seeing right now This kind of aware of the corruption that Israel has in our government only is kind of coming into light in the last even couple months. Some people have been talking about it in bigger names, like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. They've been talking about it for like maybe a year. But yeah, now people are kind of more willing to say. So it's amazing to me that back then, when you were making this documentary, people would jump to you're anti-Semitic if you even suggest that there was Israeli government at play, which is crazy. So what would you say when you were making this documentary, just to be the devil's advocate, was there anything that you came across? You're like, oh, maybe this kind of goes against the narrative that we're proposing. Was there any evidence that you found that was like, maybe this isn't the right path?
Yeah, there was definitely one. I think it was in Final Cut about the plane landing and people getting off the plane. There's evidence to suggest that there was a lot of reports about that. We went to the airport where that happened. We talked to people who worked there. They confirmed that that did happen, but there was never enough for us to really go down that path as far as we could have. And it was something we ended up, really kind of stepping back on because it got a lot of attention. And it wasn't our best information. And so in subsequent versions, especially the final version that we released in 2016, things like that we removed because we wanted to have the best evidence that we could. And if Dylan was here, he could probably list, 5 or 6 other things that, were in the first edition that didn't make it the second edition just because new information was being released all the time. And you got, again, like today we have 25 years almost to look back on this. Back then, it was only a couple of years, and information was so restrictive and was being released in such small ways that we did our best to try to navigate through that. And as new information continuously kept coming out, we would say, okay, well, that's way better than what we had over here. Let's use that and let's lose this, because we did help get things like the NORAD tapes released, and then the NIST, the NIST report came out and those different things. And so there's evidence that kept coming out that we had to kind of, ebb and flow with.
Yeah. And that's where you get like, when you talk about like what hit the Pentagon, that was really interesting because there's all this evidence that I think it's almost suggested there was some sort of missile and maybe there wasn't a plane at all. But then you have the evidence of the street lights are like knocked down. But what's crazy to me, I was thinking back on that. I was like, the main thing is people say there was a plane, then people say there was something else. Why have they never submitted any footage of an actual plane hitting the Pentagon? It's just an explosion. So I guess with all the information, what do you think actually hit the Pentagon?
Well, I know it wasn't 2 engines because the fuselage hole, if that's a fuselage hole, there's no engine holes, and those engines are 20 tons each, something ridiculous, 12 tons each, I think they are. And we talked to April Gallup, who worked in that wing of the Pentagon and crawled out through the hole and survived that event because she was able to get through. And she, without a doubt, said there was no plane there. There's no plane. There's no plane parts. There's no engines. I climbed out of a hole out of where an explosion happened. And then I went out of the building. I didn't smell diesel fuel. Like it was very strange. And so for me, I don't know what hit the Pentagon, but I don't believe that it was the plane that they said it was. I believe something else happened, and the hole in the building does not substantiate a claim of a giant 757 plane with 2 12-ton engines made of solid steel hitting into those buildings. It just doesn't line up for me. And so again, it's just one of those things that you have all these security cameras that were looking at the hole. You didn't release the footage. You tried to shut people down who were trying to get the footage. And then what the physical evidence suggests doesn't correlate with the official version. So why can't we look into this more? Why again, something the most egregious attack on American history since Pearl Harbor, and we just are like, no, we're not going to look at that anymore. We got it. We know what we're going to do, and that's not acceptable to me as somebody who was then sent to the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq. And were forced to shoot at and kill innocent people based off of that. It's like we really should know everything that happened and have all of the evidence all over the place. But that's obviously not what they wanted. That's not what happened. And so that's why people even today are still talking about it all these years later, because it doesn't make sense. It's kind of like it's like just that bad feeling you get when you're about to, when something's about to happen and you're like, I got a bad feeling I'm not going to get on this plane today, and then the plane fucking crashes, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
it's just you know that something's not right in your heart, and that connects to your brain, and your brain's like, what? Let's ask some questions. And that was always our mantra: ask questions, demand answers. There's no reason, there's
yeah,
nothing wrong with asking questions, and you can demand answers. Like these are people, these are government officials who put in these positions of power. They work for us. Hold them accountable, hold them responsible, ask them questions, don't let up. And we did that for a number of years, and so did our supporters. And it was great to see, and it was an interesting moment in history that has gone in a completely different direction over the last couple of years and has changed in so many different ways.
yeah.
It's really interesting to watch the evolution of it all.
Yeah, even Tucker Carlson is having a 9/11 series that just started coming out. I think the first episode is released on YouTube. And it's like these are, I think he at the time, I don't remember if he was on the air, but he would tell you when you watch his thing that he thought it was an official story. Now everybody's going back and questioning it. And if you think about it, it's like it was such an elaborate thing. I mean, to rig up buildings falling down, a building that wasn't even hit, then to have all these stories, then to, have people apparently calling from their cell phones on the plane. It's like the coordinative effort to make it's almost theatrical. And then I was thinking about it. I'm like, they chose the date 9/11 for 911. And I'm like I'm like, that's such an American connection. I mean, I don't know. I just would, my personal perspective is if, why would a terrorist organization, I don't know. I just, that seems to me, American way of thinking is like, let's choose the date that the country dials 911 to have that in the Americans' minds forever. I personally would expect a terrorist organization to choose something that was more in line with their beliefs. I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking about the other day. But I was even watching the BBC did they were trying to reboot your thing, and the whole time I'm watching it, I like kept checking. I'm like, I feel like they're supporting your theory. It was like it was kind of I was like, is this right? I feel like they're only validating loose change more. And the only thing that they said, which I've been thinking about since, that kind of was like, okay, I see they're questioning, like they have something to say, was when they talked about how if a controlled demolition was really done in the towers, is apparently the way you do a controlled demolition, it would be pretty much impossible, according to this expert, to hide the explosives amongst where people were working. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Nanothermite can be painted on.
Okay.
It's not something that has to be, like a chunk of C4 with a clock that's ticking down next to it, like you see in the movies. It's very
Yeah.
much not like that. Easily, you can paint nanothermite onto things and have it explode.
Wow.
There's a lot of different ways to do that.
It goes back to the Israeli art students. Like they're
It
having
unfortunately does. Yes,
literally
yes, it does.
paint.
But
Wow.
you want to talk about impossible, the way the towers collapsed, in my opinion, is the most impossible thing for me to swallow too. Talking about jumping off of building 7, what's next is watching the free fall collapse of 2 buildings that were hit in different directions by different planes, that were supposedly both miraculously collapsed into their own footprint. And the History Channel,
Yeah.
or one of the other networks, put out a documentary recently over the last 5 or 10 years claiming that the asbestos used during the construction was shorted because the mafia was ripping off the construction company. And it's just like, you're just making up whatever you can make up at this point. Like that's a
Yeah.
very cushy story. I appreciate you trying, but that's ridiculous. And the fact
Yeah.
that they fell down into their own footprint the way that they did, is, to me, is just, and again, there's so much technology that the government has that we don't know about. There's a plethora of ways that those towers could have come down, the way
Yeah.
that they did, based off of different things. We only have our basic common knowledge of things, and not even expert level about demolitions and explosives and things of that nature. It's,
Right.
again, you can't argue what you see in front of you in your
Yeah.
eyes as you see those plumes of smoke and explosive material coming out at the bottom below the debris line when the building is collapsing.
Yeah.
It's just, and then right into it. And again, you can put, and people have put, dot, 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 right around it, and just watch that whole thing come down. And for it to happen once, okay, you were great. Maybe that happened once. Maybe the top careened a little bit and then went down.
Yeah.
Fine. Twice? No way. Like mathematically impossible for that to happen the same way twice when the buildings were hit at different sides, different parts of the building, different floors of the building, where the core was either hit or not. And
Right.
so I have a lot of problem trying to swallow that those two buildings collapsed because of heat on the 100th floor.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's really interesting about the paint, because that seems like it would be pretty easy to disguise that. The other thing I was interested in, I was just going over the final cut, and I just want to make sure I understood this right, because you guys had it was so interesting yet so kind of subtle. The building with the world, you guys, I took a screenshot of it. The World Trade Center construction manager, you guys had at the top, it had a recording of him. Basically, this was before 9/11 in the recording. It was on January.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm probably jogging your memory now, but for the audience. So he was saying in January, the January before 9/11, that the building is essentially designed to not allow it to collapse if it was hit by a plane. But the top of the corner, you guys said missing since essentially 9/11. Am I jogging your memory on this?
Unfortunately,
No.
that's too
No.
many years
Okay.
ago. Yeah, I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
remember that exact claim. But yes, I mean, just to again hit on the point we were just talking about, it's like these buildings were designed to withstand multiple impacts of bigger
Yeah.
planes than what hit it, and this is documented, published, and then for smaller planes with less fuel to hit the buildings the way they did and cause them to collapse is nonsense.
Yeah, there's a clip of Donald Trump, and we all have our opinions on him, but where he called in to a news station, and it was like early hours. I don't even know if they had fallen at that point, where he said that the way the building, because he knows construction of New York, he knows that's kind of his thing. So he said the way that the tower was designed, it was like a plane couldn't really penetrate it, let alone cause the collapse. And I think at that point they hadn't collapsed. But and then if you like, all you have to do is, there's so many architects coming out now. I think there was this organization where there was like 3,600 architects signed.
Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Yeah, exactly. They just are like, this isn't possible.
Yes.
And we don't even.
I was just going to say, we got David Ray Griffin, who was one of the founders of that organization, who worked with us on Loose Change Final Cut, because again, we wanted to have the most, concrete evidence that we could to present in that film. And David Ray Griffin from Architects and Engineers joined us as a producer on that project to help put that forward. And over the years, the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth has been a fantastic organization. They've actually been recently, pretty well funded, where they're able to do different projects and put different information out. They hired Dylan to make a number of films, including Seven, as well as Unspeakable, and some other things. So all that is to say that, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
No, you're good. Yeah. You were just talking about how they've been a really big asset. I know. I was listening to another. I think I'm assuming it's the same guy, but he was just talking about. He was breaking down the history and going through the architect structure and talking about the blueprints of the building. And it's just kind of crazy that again, we're all just believing this, and now people are going back and questioning it. And I think that's just. I don't know. I mean, his kind of main point was, if the building, especially building 7, if it just fell in on itself, that'd be like the most architecture disaster in pretty much history. And that also points to the building codes of all of New York. Like, if that really happened, why aren't architects learning how to prevent such a disaster going forward, if just a couple fires caused this whole building to crumble? And I think we all know the answer is they don't even point it out in when you're in school for architecture. They don't even mention it, because I think if they mentioned it, it would be like, oh, well, like, I think every student, even on their first day, would be like, oh, now I see this was a big thing. So I think it's interesting they don't even mention it. So I guess the other thing I was going to talk to you about is there's just such a rise. And I mean, when you guys released this documentary, you guys were the grassroots. Like, nobody wanted to say conspiracy theory. It was a dirty word. To even be considered a conspiracy theorist was like a negative thing. So you guys were really the pioneers. And I think because the documentary went so mainstream, it gave a lot of people the courage to have a voice. When they almost felt like maybe they're watching these things and they felt crazy, but they didn't do all the same research. What would you give? Now, well, that being said, so that's that. And now we have a whole like movement of young conspiracy theorists out there that are doing all this research, making so many videos, and now almost to say you're a conspiracy theorist is trendy, which is so interesting because, like I said, my dad raised me on this, and I was in high school passing out this little like piece of paper with websites written for each topic in conspiracy theory, and I know Loose Change was right up there with 9/11. And people in high school, I graduated in 2010. People thought I was nuts. Like I'm okay with that. And now everyone's all jumping on the bandwagon. And I'm like, yeah, I knew about these things growing up. So what is your advice to kind of, you guys were the pioneers, in my opinion, of documenting conspiracies. What's your advice to the younger generation that's kind of taking this on?
Oh, it's such a different world. Like, I'm so excited for people who have the opportunity to get into it now because personal computing is so much more achievable for everybody. You know, when we first, what made Loose Change most successful was the fact that it was the intersection between technology evolving so that people could have personal computers, laptops that travel, nonlinear editing systems, and personal camcorders, which was before the phones. Nowadays, you know, this has way better capabilities than the cameras that we use, and it's smaller and easier to hide. You've got glasses with lenses in them and stuff like that. You got all these different things, all these different tools that you could use. It's just follow your passion. I mean, that's what Loose Change was for Dylan and myself. It was just a passion. And it was a passion because of the information. It was a passion because of the practice of creating video, which is something that we still do today. We own a production company, and so, you know, for the people who are out there today, get out there. Ask questions, demand answers, put that camera in someone's face, or hide a mic, get people into a conversation, follow the leads that you think are worth following, and just go out there and do it. And I mean, if you have the ability, travel for it too. Because if you're in Utah and you want to learn about stuff in DC, or you want to go to DC, save up the money, collect cans, whatever you got to do, buy a plane ticket, get out to DC. Because I mean, once you're traveling and engaging with other people and talking about what you're working on and finding people of a similar mindset, you get this energy going and you get this momentum going. And then when you start to get a little bit of press behind it and you create a product that people can look at and hold and comment on and share, then you have something that's truly fantastic. And so a little bit of shameless promotion. I just actually completed a book about the Loose Change years. It's called The Soldier That Left. It's coming out in August 31st of next year. And it is the behind the scenes story of how Loose Change was created and all of the crazy things that nobody knows anything about that our team went through over the years. And so it just paints that picture of young men who were just after something that they wanted accountability for. Myself as a veteran wanted answers for, and then how it all rolled out. And, you know, today it's just such a different world because we have a president who believes in conspiracy theories. At the same time, we have conspiracy theories about the president that they're not talking about, which is just putting gas on the fire. And so you can find your passion anyway. You can be a leftist conspiracy theory at this point. You can be a rightist conspiracy theory. You can be in the middle and have conspiracy theories about both of them. Like, you know, there's all these different directions you can go. And the sad part is most of the information is probably true, no matter what direction you go in. And so you just got to do the best you can with it.
With Loose Change and also your journey of just questioning the official narrative, I also see there's a flip side because there are so many young conspiracy theorists right now that everything that is presented to them, they don't even trust, which I think it's healthy skepticism is always valuable. But then we can also get into where we're questioning like every little thing. So what would be your advice to people that are coming into this conspiracy theory world? How would you recommend they navigate when they're presented with information, and not to go to the extreme where they believe nothing that they're being presented? But also, I guess, what would you recommend for somebody that's journeying down the conspiracy theory path for the first time?
It's all about correlating sources. You know, if you have one person saying something, there's not much that you can do with that. Two people, okay, maybe. 3 people, okay, now we're getting there. 5 people, if you can get people to correlate an idea and people who are involved in the subject material, then you're onto something. If you're the lone ranger out there yelling about shape-shifting lizard people sleeping on the heat rocks, you might not get a lot of people to join you. But if you're
Yeah.
talking about legitimate scientific evidence on an event that's important to American diplomacy, you can get people to talk about that. And if you can get people who are doing similar research to you. So I like to, I believe if you read 10 books on any subject, you can become an expert. You can get out there on forums and Reddit and have conversations with people who are well educated, well experienced about different things, where you can find a community of people who can actually really dive into things. And that's what we have nowadays on the internet. We have, internet sleuths. We have the government who relies on the internet and the public to answer these questions and find people like the shooter of Charlie Kirk, and things of that nature. And so there's just so much that you can do. It's just find something that you're passionate about, start traveling after it, and find like-minded people and people with some credentials that you can continue to have that conversation. Create something out of it. Don't just talk about it. Don't just post angrily on Facebook. Make something, make a video, even if it's terrible. It's, you'll get better over time. And you'll learn from your own mistakes. And the world needs voices. We need storytellers. We need people who are able to come up with ideas and present ideas that have not been presented before, because it is our collective imagination as humans who has created all of the systems we live in. They're all imaginary based. And so, follow your imagination, because imagination is reality at this point. And a lot of times that can take you to places and to information that you weren't aware of before.
Other than 9/11, what conspiracy theory do you really have a passion for that you think people need to look more into?
I mean, for me, it's Iraq. I mean, it's part of 9/11, but the number one drum I beat all the time is how bad Iraq was, how we were tricked as an American public to invade a country who had nothing to do with 9/11 based off of straight up lies. And we're talking about 4,000 American soldiers plus who died and perished in the Middle East and Iraq, plus 100,000 innocent 100,000 Iraqis. A lot of them were insurgencies in their own country. But again, in my opinion, if people started parachuting in my backyard right now, I'm going to get my guns, man. Like, that's just human nature. That's not not us versus them. And so for me, we were lied to get into Iraq. It was a blank check for the American government to give to corporations, Halliburton, KBR. And it was just an abuse of the American people. And we just ate it hook, line, and sinker, and allowed us to be, it's $4 to $6 trillion, which comes out to about $8,000 each American citizen paid, no matter your age, $8,000 per American to kill 4,000 American soldiers based off of lies. And no one was held accountable for that. And it's like 9/11, okay, it's a conspiracy. It's hard to nail down because there's a lot to it. Iraq, not hard to nail down. Very easy to hold people accountable. Very easy to point out who was responsible and what they said, where they said it, when they said it, because there's video footage of all of it. And for me, that's what, as somebody who constantly gets on media interviews, I'm always saying, hey, 9/11 is super interesting, but let's really talk about Iraq too. Because to me, it was a huge conspiracy theory created by the government, which was exposed time and again. And nowadays, nobody's been responsible for that.
What do you think the point of that was? There's so many different ideas. What do you think the main reason of us creating that war?
It was a blank. It was a way to rob the American taxpayer to make billions of dollars for executives in corporations in America. And I mean, the United States government, the United States itself is a corporation, and we are no longer the country that was founded, hundreds of years ago. We are a corporate version of that. And I'm one of them. I own 5 companies. I understand the benefit of owning companies, of owning limited liability corporations, of the tax breaks that come with it. I get it, but you don't have to kill people for it.
Definitely.
You can make money anyway. So that's me. That's what I'm always passionate about. But I just want to say thanks for having me on. It's been a great conversation. You can watch multiple different versions of Loose Change at loosechange911.com for free. The most recent version was released in 2016, which is the HD version. It's only 55 minutes. Reason being, we were hired to make a TV version cut so that our international distributors could release it. And that's what's prominent today. And you can watch that as well as some of our other films that we made. We made some comedies, you know, we made some lighthearted stuff as well. And again, look for The Soldier That Left, my personal memoir on the loose change years, coming out August 31st, 2026.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Korey. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me on.